Commissioner James Brown, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Well, as the name indicates, and as your viewers and listeners are probably thinking, I feel good, of course, because I'm on your show.
Well, I really appreciate that. Appreciate you coming out and having a conversation. I know you guys have been up to a lot, actually, at your office. You're the state auditor. Uh, but I kind of want to, before we dive into that stuff and get like the nitty gritty details of what you guys have been up to, can we get a little background? How did you get into public service in the first place? It seems like you've been kind of doing things for a while now. Some background would be wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate statement. I've been involved in the public policy arena uh, going on 31 years now. I started in the public policy arena when I went to Washington, D.C., coming right out of college at the University of Montana when I went to work for Senator Burns from Montana as an aide in the United States Senate. Spent 6 years as an aide on Capitol Hill, worked for Senator Burns and then Senator Hagel from Nebraska. And after that, sort of took a little detour, went to law school. Uh, After that, came back to Montana. It's a long story there. My mom got ill, unfortunately, and passed away, and so I had to care for her during that process. But brought me back to Montana, and then ran my own law firm for about 20 years, 18 to 20 years. But part of that is that I did public policy work, aka lobbying work for clients both before Congress and Montana State Legislature. And then, as you recall, 2020, I was elected to serve on the Public Service Commission from District 3, which is the southwest portion of Montana. Served 4 years on that commission, served as its president. And then when Troy Downing announced that he was going to run for Congress for the Eastern Congressional District here in Montana, I made the decision to run for state auditor's office as it was being vacated. And then fortunately, in November of 2024, the people of Montana elected me to be the 18th state auditor by a 22-point margin.
It was big. I recall that.
Yeah, I got the second most votes, in fact, in the 24 cycle. Christy Jacobson outpaced me in that regard, but very rewarding and very heartening that I had that level of support. And so, one way or another, I've been involved in public policy, public administration, federal level and/or state level, literally since 1995.
Wow. So I didn't know that early background there. That's super cool. You've quite the experience, to say the least. But for a lot of our listeners and just kind of everyday folks, they hear state auditor, and most people, first of all, don't even know what that even remotely entails. Maybe it's auditing government or budgets or something like that. Will you just explain a little bit what you guys do? It's a pretty big scope, from my understanding.
Yeah, this is a really interesting office that I hold. I think you identified it. The one thing that certainly I became aware of when I was running to be state auditor in 2024 is people really didn't understand the importance of the office. And part of that, of course, is didn't understand what this office is tasked with regulating. So the name is a misnomer. The state auditor's office doesn't actually audit the functions of government, despite what the name was. The title is actually a throwback to the 1889 Montana Constitution, when this office actually did the auditing functions of government at that time, and then was also essentially the Department of Revenue. But when the 72 Constitution was enacted, the audit functions moved as a constitutional matter to the legislature, and of course then the Department of Revenue was created as one of the governor's executive agencies. And so what I do under the Constitution, it literally says my duties as state auditor are, quote, provided by law. And so the legislature tells me what my jurisdiction is. And right now, my major functions are I regulate the insurance industry in Montana and also serve as the consumer advocate for insurance consumers in Montana. I serve as the Securities Commissioner, so I regulate wealth management here in Montana, and that also includes a consumer protection function. And then one of the reasons I ran for this office was because I serve as one of the members of the Montana Land Board, the 5-member land board. We manage state trust lands for the benefit of schools in Montana, raised about 80 million in 2025 for public education without single tax on that. But some of the other duties, which most people don't know about, one is I regulate the bail bonds industry in Montana. That's been quite a bit of work for a small industry. For those that followed, for example, the killing of the individual in Missoula. And then I also serve on the state board of canvassers. So I actually, I guess in a way, audit the work of the Secretary of State in relation to the conduct of elections. So, for example, in June, sat in on 2 meetings of the Board of Canvassers to basically make sure that the numbers were right coming out of the June primary. And then there's a variety of little things I do. For example, my agency is the repository for filings on public bonds. I had no idea that was one of my duties when I ran for this office. In fact, I didn't even know it until about several months into this job when I started to see filings for public bonds issuance. We don't really regulate that. We're just the repository for that. So a variety of different things. Very interesting job.
Yeah, which is actually a great teeing up for all the things we're going to talk about in this episode. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. So one of the things that you guys have really been talking a lot about actually is fraud. A couple different forms of fraud it seems like you're seeing. Can you give us a little background of what the case of fraud that you're seeing and investigating?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of fraud. Would be the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars on the insurance side, millions of dollars on the financial management, securities side, if you will. So most of your listeners are probably familiar with the work that my agency has done to identify and stop fraud through the Obamacare program here in Montana. I just pushed out a press release 2 Mondays ago, I believe, announcing that we had identified a second front in the Obamacare fraud that we identified originally. So originally, I announced that we had identified about $54 million fraud scheme that was being perpetrated against one of our Montana insurance companies through the ACA. Essentially, the way the scam worked was that these out-of-state drug and alcohol treatment centers were billing this insurance company for services allegedly provided to Native American population here in Montana. That the way the fraud scheme worked is they were recruiting Native Americans to go down to Arizona and Southern California to receive drug and alcohol treatment. That actually wasn't happening. The recruitment was happening and the human trafficking side was happening, but the actual treatment side wasn't happening. We have been able to claw back, literally stop, unlike Minnesota, where $9 billion in fraud was actually paid out. Here, the $54 million in fraud we identified for the first insurance company, we've been able to claw back a little over 40 million of that, which
Wow.
of course is great news because that's money that's not being charged to the Montana taxpayer, right? Just announced that we clawed back now for a second insurance company, another 5 million for the very scheme that we were talking about. So about 45 million in fraud stopped just through that one program alone on the insurance side. On the security side, we're seeing millions of dollars, unfortunately, in completed fraud schemes against average Montanans through such things as pig butchering schemes, deep fake impersonations, phantom AI trading bots, digital asset and crypto fraud, fake AI equity pitches. It's a whole variety of scams. And unfortunately, Montana is becoming a bigger and bigger target for these scammers because what's happening is that our population is getting older, as we know in Montana, and older persons are most off the target of fraud. And then the second thing is we have a lot of wealth that's coming into the state as you know, and so fraudsters are following where the money is, if you will.
That's really interesting, which I mean, kind of brings me to my next question, which is it seems like a lot of these fraud cases these days have some sort of technology hook. It seems like you'd mentioned deep fakes. I think something that we've all seen in the crypto stuff. Is that what you guys have seen? A lot of them are kind of being more technologically savvy with some of these fraud cases.
Oh, absolutely. Uh, we estimate that probably 22% bad actors are now using AI or some form of technology to commit their fraud scams. And the reason that is because it's one, more sophisticated, two, it's more convincing to the intended victim, which leads to the completion of the fraud itself. And then the third thing is that with the advent of the various types of technology, it's easier for fraudsters to actually reach intended victims uh, more readily. And of course, the way that that manifests itself, as I'm sure you've seen, we all get those unsolicited text messages that are bizarre and asking, "Hey, who is this?" Or you missed your court date or something to that effect. And then every time that we log onto a computer, it seems like we get some kind of unsolicited message through digital media, right? Through our Facebook page or Instagram page, that sort of thing. And then, of course, the tried and true one now for about 35, 36 years since the advent of email, of course, is you get the unsolicited email. And so technology is becoming the primary tool for fraudsters to use, and they're going away from the more traditional type, I would say, like check fraud or that kind of fraud. And unfortunately, they're becoming more successful at it. Just since 2019, we've tracked about 7.3 million through our office in completed fraud losses. Unfortunately, through the Securities, the wealth management side, and unfortunately, 2025, my first year as commissioner, was the highest reported to our office of fraud completed through these schemes, about 2 million in completed fraud. And why I keep using the term completed or reported or completed fraud is because we know that most fraud is not reported to us, unfortunately. People that are a victim of fraud are often embarrassed or ashamed that they've been a victim, and they don't want to report it to either us or to law enforcement. And so that's known fraud. So you would have to think that the numbers that I'm giving you are even greater than that.
So this sounds like these are, like you said, just folks that have, get a phishing email or, a text or something like that, end up sending somebody money or Bitcoin or something like that, and then reach out to your office after the fact. Is that kind of how that works?
Yeah, and I can give you two examples that I just recently highlighted through the agency. Student at Montana State University living in Belgrade. She received an outreach from someone who was purporting to be from the Harlowtown Police Department, saying that her name and identity had been used for a drug mule exercise on the Mexican border, and the Harlowtown Police Department needed her information in order to verify that it wasn't her that was associated with this. And of course, then that led to the threat that a warrant was going to be issued against her, and that she needed to, pay to get rid of the warrant. And unfortunately, that led to her losing about $40,000 in that scheme, if you can believe it. But what was really amazing about that scheme was that the fraudster, of course, not only identified that they were from a Montana Police Department, but they literally, when she questioned it, patched her through, of course, to like a supervisor. But more concerning about that is that they knew all her personal information. It was very scary. And then another one that fortunately only led to a loss of about $900, because the person that was the victim in this figured out, fortunately, that this was a fraud scheme. But the way that started was there was a message on her computer basically saying that there was a virus on her computer and she needed to reach out to, I think it was Microsoft,
Mm.
uh, saying that, in order to fix this virus, they had to call this number, and so they did. And then, of course, you can imagine what they did was starting to solicit her money, saying that her information was being used for nefarious purposes, and they needed this money to stop it. So, just a variety of different type of scams. And the thing that we educate people on in this regard is that there's four common schemes or themes to these scams. One is that the scammer is pretending to be a trustworthy official or a friend or a family member. They offer to solve a problem, like I was talking about, or provide a prize, or they do it under the guise of law enforcement. The big tell that we tell people is pressure tactics, getting people to act immediately, to send them money immediately, stay on the phone with them. We've got to get this resolved right away. You got to go down to your bank and wire us money, or you got to go to a crypto ATM and send us money. And then another red flag, which will be of interest certainly to your listeners, is requesting payment in unusual ways. The big
Mm.
tell is if somebody asks you to pay through gift card. I mean,
Right.
who's legitimate that asks to get paid through a gift card, right? And then, unfortunately, cryptocurrency is becoming a method that these fraudsters want to be paid by, which for me is a tell.
Certainly. Yeah, and I'll have some more questions kind of about that too. But I'm curious, without kind of tipping us off to the tricks of the trade, too much at least. How did you guys go about figuring out this Obamacare fraud? Like, what did that process look like? Super interested in it.
Yeah, this I mean, despite the fact that this is a nefarious scheme that if gone to completion would have cost insurance customers of Montana millions. The good news is that the controls that we had in place as the auditor's office in working with our regulated insurance companies uh, for them to report to us suspicious
Mm.
billing activities, if you will,
Right.
to report those to us so that we can investigate them on their behalf. That's the way that we got tipped off on this, is that one of our insurance companies started to see an unusual billing trend coming out of Southern California and out of the Phoenix area. At that time, it was probably about a couple 100,000 in billing.
Mm.
They came to meet with me and my investigative team about this, kind of handed the initial records over to us, and then we took over from there. This was just a few short weeks into my term as commissioner, right around the end of January 2025. I immediately put our four insurance investigators on this investigation, told them this is the absolute priority, kind of set some other matters aside for a while. And we knew by August of 2025 that this scheme was occurring. Uh, but what's interesting is that we have discovered now, and I can't go into too much detail of this, but we have discovered now that some of these fly-by-night treatment centers are popping up in Montana. And the
Mm.
way that we learned about that is that when we go out and do these fraud presentations, during one of these fraud presentations on one of the travel reservations, someone came forward and said, "Hey, I know about a fraudulent scheme that is exactly like this one that is operating in Montana." And so that was another way that we learned. Someone actually came forward.
Wow. It's really unfortunate to see that kind of thing. But I will say, thank you for pursuing these things. I think going after fraud, especially when it's like public money, is super important. My question around that would be, do you like this? Is there broader reforms needed to kind of the Obamacare side of things? Do you think we have the tools that we need? Just really kind of curious what your inside scoop.
Yes, I would start with this: is that with the change of administrations to the Trump administration, the fact that there are billions of dollars in fraud and waste happening at the federal level is something that this current administration is paying attention to, unlike the prior administration. The J.D. Vance, the vice president, has created a fraud task force that is looking more seriously into identifying and prosecuting fraud. That has been a very successful effort. just here in Montana. The AG, Austin Knudsen, who is a wonderful attorney general, he is the designee essentially from the state of Montana to work with the vice president's office on this state federal joint partnership. You may have seen that he just announced recently that his office has been able to stop and prosecute about $1 million, I think, maybe more than that, in Medicaid fraud. And so what was needed is the federal government needed to get serious about identifying and prosecuting fraud, and that has been a big change. Same thing I would say through my office. I'm not knocking my predecessors in this office, but one of the things that I talked about when I was running for this office is that I intended to make criminal prosecution and fraud investigation two of my top priorities for my administration. As soon as I got into office, that directive was sent out to my office, and we have picked up our fraud investigation efforts here, and that has resulted in saving Montana consumers millions of dollars. But the reality is that specific to the Obamacare program, that program was designed to just get people enrolled on the federal exchange, right? From the Obama administration, and the controls that a private company would otherwise have, if you will, if they were offering insurance, were lessened through this program. And so the program was literally designed just to get people on. So fraudsters figured that out pretty quick, right? That there was nobody, checking to see who they were, whether they actually met the eligibility requirements. And so that's what needs to happen in the Obamacare program, is they need to be serious about actually checking who's signing up for this, and to tighten down the controls if the program is going to continue.
No, that makes total sense there. And it seems like both you and the AG have got some press releases coming out once a week dealing with some of these things. And that's far better than I think the things that we've seen in Minnesota and other places that have kind of botched the efforts to fight fraud. So love to see that.
I'll address that. Through my 18 months of work as state auditor, my thought or my informed opinion on what happened in Minnesota was there was willful blindness by the state of Minnesota and its officials in the state. It is difficult for me to imagine that level of fraud wasn't known at some level within that government. And in fact, if you read the reports, there were numerous civil servants in Minnesota who were blowing the whistle saying, we've got some real fraud problems here. And those were not acted upon. And I would say either that's gross incompetence by the leadership in Minnesota, or it was willful blindness.
Could absolutely see it. One of the things that I think is really interesting about your approach to your office is, one, the need for regulations and consumer protection, but on the other side, kind of maintaining clear rules of the road that don't get in the way of legitimate businesses. Could you talk a little bit about your philosophy of balancing those things, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. As we talked a little bit earlier in this show, I am tasked by the legislature to be the consumer protection advocate for Montanans who deal with their insurance companies and their wealth advisors. And I got to say, I very much enjoy that role. Native Montanan, grew up in this state. I've been very blessed to create a business in this state, now to be elected to office. And so you can imagine I take my consumer protection role very seriously. But I'm also tasked with the legislature in creating a regulatory environment here in Montana that lends itself to businesses wanting to do business in Montana, not to be overregulated in places such as California, for example, or Washington State, where businesses are leaving because of overregulation. And so what I try to do, and it tacks with my philosophy anyway, is to have proper size regulation that lends itself to the free market, essentially being able to operate as the free market, which creates an atmosphere where there's competition in the market that benefits not only consumer through lower prices, because competition is the way that you do that, obviously, but also lends itself to businesses and companies wanting to come to Montana and do business. but at the same time holding businesses that do want to do business in Montana and do that to the highest standards, and to make sure that the law is enforced and that they're not ripping off Montanans. And right now, I feel like in the 18 months that I've been auditor, I've achieved a pretty good balance in that regard. Companies tell me all the time that they consider Montana to be a very friendly regulator market, a freedom state, if you will. So we do have businesses that want to come here. And at the same time, as I've talked about, saving millions of dollars for Montanans in unjustified rate increases. I mean, you saw the press release that I put out just in from July 1st to July 1st of 25 to July 1st of 26, denied almost 18 million in unjustified rate increases on Montana consumers. And then I put out a second press release saying that due to the partnership efforts that I've created with Montana financial institutions to help us work together to stop fraud on the payment side, just in 2026 alone, we've been able to stop, this is incredible, $2 million in fraudulent payments from ever being processed.
Wow.
So,
and that's money that's it hasn't, that those folks get back. Is that kind of how that works?
Yeah, it's money that they never sent out in the first place, if you will, on the fraud scheme, right? We were able to tell the people that were going to be the victim of the fraud, hey, stop what you're doing and think about what's going on. Don't send that money. And then they're like, you're right, I was going to be the victim of the scheme. And then on the insurance side, I review every insurance policy that is filed and every rate adjustment, usually an increase, as you can imagine, to make sure that it's actuarially justified. And that's where the 18 million number comes from, is that we identified over the last year 18 million in unjustified rate increases in Montanans.
Wow. I would say, being in public policy, one of the things, especially public policy in Montana, one of the things that we often point to is California. And we say, hey, whatever they're doing, we probably shouldn't be doing some of those things. They do fix things on a rare occasion, but most of the time they tend to make things worse. It seems like your office has had kind of the polar opposite approach of what California has done, especially on insurance. Will you just fill us in on, the background of maybe like home insurance for fires or anything kind of like that? Give us some context of what the scope of the problem is that California is kind of causing and the different approach you're taking.
Yeah, that's an excellent state to do a comparison on. So what we've seen coming out of California for almost a 10-year horizon is that insurance companies are pulling out of California, particularly in the homeowners market, because they just don't want to do business in that state anymore for various reasons. One is the regulatory climate, right? There's a belief, and it's backed up, that the California Insurance Commissioner is too willing and too quick to get into the actual operations of insurance companies and then put mandates on them as to requirements of coverage and areas of coverage, which, as you can imagine, a business that is all based on risk and adjusting to risk, if your regulator is telling you can't insure for risk, then you're not going to be profitable. And so we don't do that in Montana, which is why companies want to do business in the state. The other thing that has a bearing as compared to a company operating in Montana as opposed to California, as we know, in California, there have been billions of dollars in insurance losses due to poor land management policies in the state. The perfect example of that, of course, was the LA fires in January of 2025, which is the single greatest insurance loss event in the history of the United States, as you can imagine. And we know part of the reason that those LA fires got to the degree that they did and did the damages that it did is because California wasn't properly managing vegetation in its state and wasn't properly filling up its reservoirs for purposes of fire suppression, correct? And so that led to that catastrophic loss here in Montana, at least since Governor Gianforte became governor, thank goodness, in January of 2021, the state of Montana has taken land use and land management far more seriously, uh, where we are active in managing fuel loads in the state. And of course, that has, most people don't think about this, that has a corresponding effect on insurance rates, right? Because insurance companies are rating for risk. And if they see the state or localities are properly managing fuel loads, which ensures that we don't have the size and level of wildfires in Montana, then they can keep their premium rates down. It's a win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's something that folks, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around sometimes. And I understand because most people don't work in this field or in forest management for that matter. But, the important thing I think there is, catastrophic fire is different than like a low intensity fire. Like our forests need fire to some extent, but some of these catastrophic fires, like the one that we saw out of California and some other places that scorch the earth to the point where there's nothing survives that. So that maybe brings us a good segue to the land board, because you guys do actually manage forests to some extent when it comes to the state, and you guys oversee those decisions. But most people don't really know what the land board does. Will you unpack that a little bit and maybe your role in that?
Yeah, great question. I'm glad to talk about it and educate the public on this. As you stated, many people don't even know that Montana has such a thing as a land board. But this gets a tip of the hat to our ancestors and those that set up the state of Montana in 1889. So the land board has been in existence since the original Montana Constitution. And so if you think about the 19th century, the way that public education was funded, it wasn't funded, say, from a mill levy or a property tax, right? Up until the late 19th century, most education was either provided through some kind of religious school, or it was done through homeschooling. But when the public education concept came about, the way that those that set up Montana decided that they were going to fund education was to work with the federal government to set aside certain lands that were granted by Congress to the state of Montana at the time we became a state, set those aside for use by the public for production purposes such as agriculture, timber production, mining, oil and gas, that sort of thing, and that the proceeds that were raised by the state leasing its state property to these companies generates funding for schools. And that was the original mechanism. Well, this concept has remained even through the 72 Constitution. And so what the land board does is we manage state trust lands for the benefit of schools in Montana. About 5.2 million surface acres that we manage, which is considerable. I talked a little bit about earlier in 2025, we raised about 80 million for public education in Montana without raising a single tax on anybody or having to pass a mill. The 5 members of the land board has been consistent since the original Constitution. It's myself as the state auditor. It's the superintendent of schools. It's the governor. It's the secretary of state. And then, of course, it's the attorney general. And then we meet once a month in Helena to work through the various issues that our management of state lands would require. But as you stated, one of those that we do very well with the help of the Department of Natural Resources, which helps us administer these state lands, is we actually actively manage timber on state trust lands to make sure that it doesn't create a catastrophic fire risk. In fact, our state lands are much better managed than federal lands, as you can imagine. But again, to give credit to the governor, when he came in, he saw, of course, that our federal forests weren't being properly managed. And so, again, working with the Trump administration, he got the good neighbor authority from the federal government, where the state of Montana now has more management say in how federal lands are managed, federal forests are managed in Montana. That has been very productive.
Absolutely. I think Governor Gianforte's leadership on active forest management has been huge. Same with DNRC and their role there. So with the land board, it seems like you guys meet You take votes on things about how to manage these. You say 5 million acres, I believe.
About 5.2 million. Yeah.
About 5.2
That's
million
surface
acres.
acreage. Yeah.
Surface acreage. What's your philosophy as you go into these and you're thinking about this? Obviously, you're having to weigh in and make decisions on how to manage this land. Would you give us an inside scoop of what your philosophy might look like there?
You bet. Well, as someone who grew up in Montana, who grew up around agriculture, I'm a strong believer in proactive and productive use of land in Montana to raise revenue and create good jobs. That's how I came in, my philosophy coming into the land board matter. I told you, I think, as part of my introduction, that I was a private practice attorney. So a number of my clientele are senior agriculture operations, historic agriculture operations. I would compare it to, say, the Dutton Ranch, if you watch the Yellowstone TV show. So I had a lot of experience dealing with the land board and the DNRC in that regard. I had a lot of frustration under the Democrat administrations when they were governor, that the ethos of productive land use was being subservient, starting to be subservient to conservation practices, if you will, through the land board, which is not the mission of the land board. So that's sort of my philosophy. But the actual decision making is pretty easy because it's guided by the constitutional principles that were set forth for how state trust lands were to be managed. And the overriding constitutional principle, which is set forth in the 72 Constitution, is that we are to maximize revenue generated off of state trust lands for the benefit of trust beneficiaries, which are public schools in Montana, both at the college level and junior high school level. So the first consideration when looking at any project is how much revenue is this lease going to raise, or this type of activity on state lands going to raise. So that's a pretty easy calculation. But the second thing is, of course, is that you want to make sure every project that we're working on is done in a manner that preserves the asset, which is, of course, state lands. And so you don't want to damage the lands over the long term, because it will result in a loss of revenue over time. So you're looking to get the most you can off of whatever the revenue you can off of the particular project, while at the same time making sure the land itself is preserved in perpetuity for use to raise funds. We are working on a couple policies, I would say, that are consistent with what my philosophy was going on to the land board. One of the things I brought forward is that if there are competing uses or competing application for use of state trust lands, and all things being equal, then agriculture production, livestock production will get a preference over the other type of use. What we're seeing, of course, is with APR, the conservation herd is becoming a problem. So that's one of the things that I've moved forward. And then the second thing is that I want to make sure that when Montana does sell a piece of state trust land, that we're actually getting fair market for value for that. And then we are also reinvesting that money into lands that would either create more revenue for the state and or open up public access for those that exercise our hunting and harvesting heritage, which is what it says in the Montana Constitution. So you're looking at various values, but the overall theme is you're trying to raise as much money as you can for public education.
Yeah, as any rancher or farmer has ever, if you ever ask them, they'll say, well, yeah, I want to maximize my value, but it's not just maximize my value this year. I own this land. I want this to go into the future, and I want to be able to pass this down to other generations too. So that's definitely a Montana value, I would say, for sure. Well, one of the things that you mentioned here that folks don't really know that much about is the capital formation and investment function that you guys facilitate. How have you approached this role? How how does it work? What's your guys' office's role in this area?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up too. Yeah, excellent questions today to educate the public about what this office does, because as we started out with, many people don't even know of the existence of the auditor's office. So lesser known responsibility. Again, this is tasked by the legislature, wise decision by the legislative branch in Montana. We are tasked with promoting capital formation in the state of Montana. Interesting mission, I think, a good one. What we try to do is promote capital investment in Montana. And we try to do that by developing relationships with the financial advisors that register to do business in the state with us. And then also by hosting public information conferences and forums to try to connect those that have capital to those that want to start businesses in Montana in order to grow businesses and create jobs in the state. The most recent example of this that I can point to is just in the month of June, we held a Investing in Montana Summit in Bozeman, Montana, which brought forth like panelists and speakers talking about what would be Montanans, talking about how they created their businesses in Montana, how they got their original capital, talked about sort of the challenges that they had to overcome in promoting their business. And then what we also did was we brought in a patent attorney that talked a little bit about how to get patents filed, to protect your intellectual property. And then we also bring in, of course, some folks from our office that talk about the regulation side, what those interested in doing capital formation and business growth in Montana, what they have to comply with. And, a very successful event, had about 80 attendees. And what we did is we connected entrepreneurs with those that are interested in investing in business. But the other thing I do, which is pretty interesting, is I'm sort of a salesman for the state of Montana, because when I go to national conferences on the security side, if you will, wealth management side, what I try to do is arrange meetings with businesses that may want to come and do business in Montana and try to pitch the state and the great regulatory environment that we have here to try to get them, kind of like the governor does, to relocate to Montana and set up shop here.
No, it's definitely a thing where when you're starting a business, it can be extremely overwhelming. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, and yeah, it's a lot to kind of wade into it. It's super rewarding. And I think historically, looking back in Montana, this is something that people moved to Montana historically to start businesses, whether it's, to open a small shop in a mining town or to go get a mining claim. And it's cool to see that tradition continue on.
Yeah, that's well said. That your Montana history, right? I mean, at one point in our state's history, we had the most millionaires per capita here in the Treasure State than any other state in the Union. Of course, that was right around the time, of course, that of the Copper Kings. But Montana has, there's a reason why the state's nickname is the Treasure State, right? I understand that people call us the Big Sky State, but that, for those who know your Montana history, that was actually a marketing campaign in the early 60s for the state of Montana to get tourists to come here. But we are the Treasure State, and the reason that is because we have plenty of natural resources that are ripe for development and creation of wealth in the state. And then more recently, with what we're seeing out of the Bozeman area, of course, is that we have universities in the state that are creating another Treasure State resources, right? Our young people in Montana, and educating them into the high-tech economy. You've seen just Gallatin County, just the growth in per capita income for that county just in the last 15 years is because we have the workers here that high-tech companies want to hire and work in their companies. But the one university that I always highlight here in the state is the School of Mines in Butte, right?
Mhm.
Montana Tech University, it is one of the most respected universities in the United States, and the placement rates for students coming out of Montana Tech, 98%. But what that school is teaching Montana kids is the skill set to be successful in the natural resources industry through like oil and gas exploration, geology, um, uh, anything to do with natural resources. Um, Absolutely incredible education that we get here.
Yeah, it's, being a big nerd that I am, I spend a lot of my free time reading like historical newspapers of Montana, kind of, in the late 1800s, articles in Butte and stuff. And one of the most surprising things that I found was since pretty much the founding of Montana, people have complained of folks leaving, of our young people leaving the state. And I think we're finally getting to a place where we're balancing the need for regulation with the understanding that too much regulation hurts businesses. And we're starting to have folks stick around. And I think our universities are doing a good job um, of teaching folks the things they need to be successful in our state.
Yeah,
Well,
they're giving our young people the skill sets to do careers that will allow them to stay in the state of Montana. I mean, it is well known. If you look at Montana's history, there were two big exports from the state, right? One was our young people because they couldn't find necessarily good paying jobs here. And then, of course, out of state corporations coming into Montana, extracting our resources and sending them mainly to the East Coast and Wall Street for their economic benefit. We're starting to turn both of those trends around, which is a really good thing for the future of this great state.
Well, Commissioner, I appreciate your time. But before we kind of close this out, I wanted to just kick it over to you. Your office does a lot. I think we covered a ton of the stuff that you guys covered, but did I miss anything? Is there anything else that folks should know?
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to highlight is something that you and I worked on during the 2025 Montana legislative session, and that was to make Montana a great place for digital innovation and business. Uh, based on conversations that you and I had, immediately after I took office, I directed my agency to hold a series of public listening sessions around the state. Ended up holding 3 of those to receive input on digital assets, financial innovation, and blockchain technology. We had folks provide great comment as to how Montana could be a leader in the digital economy. And then, of course, I supported a bill by Senator Daniel Zolnikoff out of Billings that made Montana the first state where those that were in the business, if you will, of digital tokens could register their activities in the state and start doing business, that regulated business in the digital token space. And that bill made it through the legislature and signed by Governor Gianforte. We now, as the state auditor's office, have the framework for companies that want to do business in the digital token space. In that regard, that legislation and the work that I've done regulatory has brought clarity for digital assets so that businesses and entrepreneurs can clearly understand the legal environment and the rules in which they operate and to have the ability to launch billion-dollar businesses out of the state of Montana. And so kudos to you and to the Frontier Institute, and kudos to Senator Zolnikoff for his insight and foresight.
Yeah, one thing I'll add there to our listeners here about this is, as someone who's worked in kind of the digital asset world for a number of years now, Commissioner Brown, you've had a really good perspective on this. Every behind the scenes conversation we've had is you're open to innovation and good actors, but you're going after the people that are bad actors. And I think that very much applies to digital assets too. There's some really great potential for Montana benefiting from these, but there's also some things that we need to address. Whether it's Bitcoin ATMs and the fraud that happens there. So I just commend you for your leadership in that as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. And I commend you for your leadership in this space too. It's not hyperbole to say that by the end of the 21st century here, digital assets will probably be the primary form of commerce, not only in the United States, but in the world. And it is healthy for the future of this country to be the leader in that space and not cede that innovation to our economic rivals, the Chinese. And so for those of us that can see that, I think it's very good that we're getting out ahead of this.
Yeah. The last thing I'd add for that too is building on that is, something about digital assets is people are often worried. I love cash. I think cash is great. I think cash is going to be here for, quite some time, to say the least. But the thing about digital innovation and how America has approached this is a very decentralized manner. We're letting the free market go and build these things. And we're also limiting the government from taking leadership and creating, a central bank digital currency. And if we don't have this kind of framework here, then places like China will just do a central bank digital currency, and the negative aspects there will just grow.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. I'm with you. I'm still a cash guy. Cash is king. But for purposes of maintaining the United States' preeminent role as the world's leader, we have to, as a country, outcompete the Chinese in this space, or else other countries are going to start looking to the Chinese as and the yen, I suppose, as the world currency, which is going to be extremely damaging to the American consumer.
Well, Commissioner Brown, how can folks learn more about your office or get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, the easiest way to do that is to go to our website, which is csimt.gov, csimt.gov. We have a panoply of information on our website about what the agency does, kind of what we regulate, helpful information, how to deal with your insurance company, what happens in the case of a flood, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of consumer education and knowledge on that. The other thing is that the legislature in 2025 graciously acceded to my request that they give me an extra $100,000 in the budget for me to send my staff out into communities across Montana, particularly eastern Montana, where I'm focusing on, to hold forums about what our agency does and how we can help, and putting on fraud presentations. I would encourage folks to attend one of those live events where they can actually talk to one of our staff and get help and learn about the agency. One of the things that I noticed, just being a citizen of Montana, I grew up in Southwest Montana, the Dillon area. One of the things I noticed over time is that Helena often forgets about Eastern Montana or rural Montana, particularly the agencies. I made a pledge when I ran for this office in 2024 that I'd bring the agency out to the people, and I'm accomplishing that. So either go to our website and learn about us, or go to one of our live presentations.
A pledge well kept. Well, thank you, Commissioner. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great. Thanks for having me on.